Good morning. Today is the 27th day of January 2017, and we are very happy to have Kittu Reddy with us for another of the series in the human cycle. Namaste.
I'll start?
Yes.
Is it all right?
Yes.
So I'll first give you a quick summary of what we have done so far, the key points, and then develop a little further.
Good.
The first and most important point you must always remember is that this book is on social science, and Sri Aurobindo puts forward the concept that society evolves through certain psychological stages. Not that the external part is unimportant, but the psychological stages are more important. He names them symbolic, typal, conventional, individualistic or rational, and subjective. He elaborates on them in some detail in the first 5 chapters. In the 7th chapter, he speaks of the ideal law of social development, which is evidently futuristic. The relationship between individuals and individuals, individuals and groups, groups and groups, individual and humanity, group and humanity, and the reverse. He puts forward the ideal relationship between all this, and the method that he has suggested to bring this about is self-realization. So it is not by external methods mainly, it is much more by the inner method of self-realization. Now, since society is made up of individuals, and this self-realization is applicable not only to society but to individual also, therefore he concentrates on the individual first. Because what is true for the individual is going to be true for the society. So where does the individual identify himself first? First it is with the body and the physical consciousness. When it is entirely with the body and physical consciousness, it is called barbarism. Then it moves up to the vital level, which is with all its desires and possessions. And when the human individual identifies himself with that, he calls that vital barbarism. In many ways, much worse than the physical barbarism. Then one moves to the mental level. But there also there is a mental barbarism. A barbarism which is, as Sri Aurobindo says, more reactive than active. A mind which anyway, the main thing is that when the mind reacts and not takes its time to think, to collect the data, and then analyze and then come to an opinion, it is a kind of mental barbarism. And that is almost today the universal disease of man in a sense, which manifests itself very strongly in the news channels, in the social media. But it is barbarism in some case, some way or the other, it is barbarism. So then from there he moves on to culture. And he defines culture as that state, right? I shall read out the sentence. Not to live principally in the activities of the sense mind, because he has explained the sense mind, the dynamic mind, the aesthetic mind, the ethical mind, and the intellectual mind. But in the activity of knowledge and reason and wide intellectual curiosity. The mind must be always on that level. The activities of the cultivated aesthetic being, the activities of the enlightened will, which makes for character and high ethical ideals and a large human action. The important is enlightened will, not merely a will, right? Not to be governed by our lower or our average mentality, but by truth and beauty and a self-ruling will. Self-ruling will. You govern yourself. You cannot say, pass the responsibility on somebody else for what you are doing. So self-ruling will. This is the ideal of a true culture and the beginning of an accomplished humanity. Then after that he goes into aesthetic culture, ethical culture, and shows how very often they clash, most often they clash, and the harmony to be brought about between these two different aspects is possibly at the intellectual level. So he suggests and says that it seems that reason might be able to play the role of harmonizing between these two. So there are 2 chapters on reason. Reason as governor of life and the office and limitation of the reason. That means its function and where it cannot really give you the answer. Now here he brings in a very different idea, which is very fundamental to his book. That is that the human psychology has 3 levels. The infrarational, vital, physical, impulses, movements, etc. The rational and the suprarational. Now, as I said, there are 5 parts of the being, 5 seekings. The seeking for knowledge, the seeking for beauty, the seeking for good, the seeking for God, and the seeking for the fulfillment of life. All human beings have got all of these in varying proportions. So knowledge, usually the instrument is reason. Beauty, the instrument is the aesthetic being. Good is the ethical being. God is through religion and spirituality. And life is through the vital being. So all human beings have got these in their psychology. And depending on the predominance, you will say that he is an intellectual or he is an artist or he is a saint or whatever it is, right? Or a man of action. Now he shows that all these go through that. The first movement of reason, of knowledge, is hardly reason, it is below the reason. Feelings, likes, dislikes, etc., etc. Then one evolves to the reason. True knowledge comes from above. Suprarational knowledge. Beauty is instinctive, impulsive. Then you bring it under some kind of control with the reason. But true beauty is always from above. Same thing with ethics. It is based on likes and dislikes. Then you try to set up a standard. Then you abandon all standards and get that is the Bhagavad Gita. Religion, very much infrarational at the beginning. You try to control it by some kind of reason. But true religion is spirituality, above, suprarational. And the same thing with life. So he gives an illustration that the first movements of love are infrarational. Then you try to control them by some kind of rationality, but true love is always beyond spiritual. Once he has explained this on the individual level, now he goes back to society. And the society exactly passes through these three stages. So there is the infrarational society, then there is the rational society, and hopefully in the future, the suprarational spiritual society will take birth. So today, last time I spoke about the infrarational age of the cycle. It is one thing you must always remember, that when you make these psychological divisions, they are not, cast iron. They mold one into each other and they can simultaneously exist. In fact, I think in all of us, there is an infrarational element, there is a rational element, and there is also a suprarational element, which derives its light and knowledge from above. And when somebody is more or less on that level, you say he is tending to become a yogi. When somebody is more or less on the rational level, he is an intellectual. Otherwise, he is a vital man of action and etc. etc. So, in the infrarational age of the cycle, it was these feelings and impulses that dominated, but that does not mean that there was not the play of the mind. The play of the mind was there. But society on the whole was dominated by these movements from the vital and physical. I would not like to put a stamp of inferior, because very often your vital intuitions are very much more correct than the rational. Right? But definitely the plane was on the vital and physical plane. That passed, and then we have entered the rational age. And the beginning of the rational age in the modern era was in Europe after the Renaissance and the Reformation. The Reformation was a negative movement in this sense that it eliminated the interference of the church and religion in life. And the Renaissance was an assertion that reason has to govern life. Today, the whole world has moved into that line. Anything that one does in life has to be justified by reason. You cannot act according to your impulse in public life. Neither can you claim that you are acting from higher intuition. It has to be acceptable to the people. So the world today has moved towards what we may call the curve of the rational age. So he has got two chapters here. One is the curve of the rational age, and the next one is the end of the curve of reason. Inevitably a time will come when people will discover that reason is not the instrument. It's a very useful instrument, but it is not the instrument. So, he says, it's an interesting thing, the present age of mankind may be characterized as a graded psychological evolution of the race to discover and work out the right principle and secure foundations of a rational system of society. It has been an age of progress. But progress is of two kinds: adaptive and radical. This is very important. Adaptive means you leave the fundamentals in place. You adjust. Minor changes continually. Radical is you question the very foundations on which that society has been built. The modern age is radical. It questions everything. So the place of woman, at one time woman was down. Why should they be down? Challenge that. So like that you go on, right? So the modern age is always has been radical. And it follows a typical course. Beautiful words. Luminous seed time. Luminous seed time. This seed, the idea has been that slowly blossoms. And a period of enthusiastic effort and battle. Because the old will not give way easily. Next, a partial victory and achievement. And a brief era of possession. Then disillusionment and the birth of a new idea and endeavor. See the word, this series seems to follow always a typical course. So you put forward an idea, there is a battle, there is a victory, and then inevitably there is disillusionment. So you see now this is, we go on from one series to another. So democracy, after democracy comes socialism. After socialism, God knows what will come now, right? So he is elaborating, right? The main idea that he is trying to say is that however good it is today, reason will always be questioning. And if it finds that it is dissatisfied, it will demand a new idea. See, that is why an age of reason is always an age of progress. Because you can't be satisfied. So you go on and on and on. Ultimately, you will then plump into spirituality. But ultimately. So, this process has to continue. Until the reason can find a principle of society, or else a combination and adjustment of several principles which will satisfy it. The question is whether it will ever be satisfied, or can ever rest from questioning the foundation of established things. If it is reason, it is always going to question, right? So then he comes to, if we may judge from the modern movement, the progress of the reason as a social renovator and creator would be destined to pass through three successive stages, which are the very logic of its growth. It is not accidental, it is inevitable. The first, individualistic and increasingly democratic, with liberty for its principle. The second, socialistic, in the end perhaps a governmental communism with equality and the state for its principle. And the third, if it ever goes beyond that, the theoretical stage, anarchistic in the higher sense of that much abused word. So you see, liberty, equality, anarchy. By anarchy he means, he used the word, that much abused word. Normally when you say anarchy, you mean lawlessness and confusion. But here it is an anarchy where everybody is living according to the higher law and perfect harmony. So there are two anarchies, or let us say three anarchies. There is the vital anarchy, confusion. There is the intellectual anarchy, where everybody is allowed to think freely, but it doesn't lead to a stability of society. And there is the spiritual anarchy, where everybody is living according to his inner law. So society, when it is governed by reason, is bound to go through these stages: liberty, equality, and anarchy. Now there is a very interesting thing here. It is in this transition to its third and consummating stage, if or whenever that comes, that the power and sufficiency of the reason will be tested. See, the basic assumption is that reason can govern life perfectly, govern society and society also. He says that will be tested only in the third stage of anarchy. Why? Because till that third stage, it is not reason that governs. It is force that governs. How? It is the reason of a few people that govern the whole society. You tell me one society where everybody's reason is given free play. Doesn't exist.
No.
Right? So when we are saying reason is governing, it is the reason of Narendra Modi or Trump or whoever it is. Right? You might not agree at all, but it is his reason that governs. Till then, it is force that governs. Correct? And when I say force, I am not meaning violent physical force. It is the force which he has got by his authority. You can say what you like about America. It has no value unless Trump agrees with you. Correct or not? Practically, it has no value. It is just a way of letting out your opinion or your steam. So, for till this third stage has its trial, it is force that in the last resort really governs. Reason gives to force, only gives to force the plan of its action and a system to administer. So Mr. Trump has got a plan of action. He has decided to build a wall separating Mexico from the United States. He's just going ahead. Right? He has got the money, he is moving ahead. So reason gives force the plan of action. There are hundreds and thousands of Americans who are opposing this. No choice. All right. So, now it was individualism, the fourth stage of social evolution, that gave reason its chance. Before that, man accepted tradition, custom, conventions without too much questioning. But when reason comes into the picture, it inevitably starts questioning everything. So he says, reason can accept no tradition merely for the sake of its antiquity. Reason can accept no convention because merely men are agreed upon it. Reason cannot accept any institution because it serves some purpose. That is a practical thing, but reason will not accept it. The next sentence is important. There arises the necessity of a universal questioning. And from that necessity arises the idea that society can only be perfected by the universal application of the rational intelligence to the whole of life. This is a very key sentence. The necessity of a universal questioning. You question everything. Why? Whatever it is. Once you start questioning, there arises the necessarily it will happen that society can be perfected by the universal application of reason to life. Because if reason has questioned and is not satisfied, then reason will have to give you another method and answer for that. Absolutely clear, no? So, the universal application of the rational intelligence to the whole of life, to its principles, to its details, to its machinery, and to the power that drives the machine. Now the question is, you are going to apply reason to all the details of life. Whose reason? Right? So, the reason which is to be universally applied cannot be the reason of a ruling class, because they'll use it for their own self-interest. It cannot be the reason of a few preeminent thinkers, because the mass and the majority will not be able to grasp this thing. it must be the reason of each and all seeking for a basis of agreement. That is the basis of democracy. Everybody is going to participate in that process of democracy, which is what we call election. So whether it is the President of India or the poorest man, illiterate, the votes are equal. So it must be the reason of each and all seeking for. So hence arises the principle of individualistic democracy. That the reason and will of every individual in the society must be allowed to count equally with the reason and will of every other in determining its government, in selecting the essential basis, and in arranging the detailed order of the common life. So this is the whole basis of what we call individualistic democracy, which almost all the countries in the world are more or less practicing. And this is not because the reason of one man is as good as the reason of another, but because otherwise we get back inevitably to the rule of a predominant class. And we don't want that. Democracy is that, right? The next point is very important. Secondly, each individual must be allowed to govern his life according to the dictates of his own reason and will, so far as that can be done, without impinging on the same rights of the others. You see, now this is what today modern man wants to live his own life, governed by his own reason, provided he does not interfere with the right of the other man to live his own life. And Sri Aurobindo has given an example of himself, where when he was publishing the Arya, I think the proofs had to be taken and returned. So there was a gentleman who used to come, and he started coming late or irregularly. And Amritadas scolded him, told him that he should come in time. But then he added, "Why are you drinking? You should not drink." Sri Aurobindo heard that. Sri Aurobindo said, "Look, in this democratic age, it is not your business whether he drinks or not. It is your business to see that he keeps the time and the contracts." See, now he was practicing this concept of democracy. You have a right to live your own life. Now Alexei is living in Golconda. He has a right to live his own life. But suppose he starts drinking and making a mess there, then he is interfering in somebody else's life. Correct? So this is the principle of the modern age. Each one must be allowed to govern his own life, governed by reason. So his individual judgment so formed will therefore guide society. This is the beautiful theory that we have set up. In practice, it is found that these ideas will not hold for a long time. See, that is why democracy has collapsed. Not collapsed, but not satisfying to the extent that it wants to. Why? The ordinary man is not yet a rational being. Emerging from a wrong infrarational past, he is not able to form a reasonable judgment, but thinks either according to his own interests, impulses, and prejudices, or according to the ideas of those who are more active in intelligence. Look at this practically now. Most human beings do not have an opinion of their own, right? Either it's an opinion, or even if they have an opinion of their own, it is based on interests, impulses, and the lower things. Or somebody more intelligent and he has his impact on you. Secondly, very important, he does not use his reason to come to an agreement with his fellows. Is it a fact of life or not? That I use my reason to come to an agreement, or I use my reason to impose my idea? Generally. So it is generally the second one. It leads to friction, right? Finally, he does not use his reason to arrive at a rational adjustment of his life with the life of others. His natural tendency is to enforce the aims of his life on the others. Therefore, there comes thus to be a wide gulf between the ideal and the first result of its practice. There is here a disparity between fact and idea that must lead to inevitable disillusionment and failure. This is the state of all democratic societies today. What we say is it is the least of the evils. But that's all. It's still an evil, right? Yes. So he says, how brilliantly he put, the individualistic democratic ideals brings us at first to the more and more precarious rule of a dominant class in the name of democracy over the ignorant, numerous, and less fortunate mass. Secondly, and this is very important, since the idea of liberty and equality are abroad and cannot be stifled, it must lead to the increasing effort of the exploited masses to assert their own right, and therefore to a war of classes. Inevitable. You have thrown all these ideals, and then you are dominating. Inevitably, if you had not thrown, like 500 years back, they would meekly accept. You have thrown these ideas of liberty and equality, and everybody is. And then you dominate. They will demand their right. Thirdly, it develops inevitably as part of its process a perpetual strife of parties. See, that is why parties come in. Yeah. Because we represent an idea, a value, which we want to impose on the country. Another group represents another ideal, right? And so the whole party system has come. And then, as he says, it is a sterilizing chaos of names, labels, programs, war cries. All lift the banner of conflicting idea or ideals, but all are really fighting out under that flag a battle of conflicting interests. Finally, individualistic democratic freedom results fatally in an increasing stress of competition, which replaces the ordered tyrannies of the infrarational periods of humanity by a sort of ordered conflict. So there it was ordered tyranny, now it is ordered conflict. And this conflict ends in the survival not of the spiritually, rationally, or physically fittest, but of the most fortunate and vitally successful. So you must be lucky, either in your family or many other things. I don't bring names, right? And you must be vitally successful. It is evident enough that whatever else it may be, this is not a rational order of society. It is not at all the perfection which the individualistic reason of man had contemplated as its ideal or set out to accomplish. Now, we'll stop here today. The thinker who proposed this society, when he finds that in practice it is not going the way he wanted it to, he will not stop. He will start thinking all over again. How do I improve it? How do I change it? And this will inevitably lead you from the individualistic ideal to what is called the socialistic ideal. See, so there is a logic behind all this. So it is no use getting angry and saying, oh, these bloody Russians, they have moved to the social, right? These different views, it is inevitable that it will go through this progression, individualistic socialistic, then a harmony between the two or a compromise between the two, and then when man is ready, the anarchistic. So, once you understand this, you will see that one society needs more individualism now, another society needs more socialism now. And therefore, wherever there is a huge amount of poverty, inevitably it will lead to socialism. Where there is a reasonable amount of wealth, it will be more individualistic. So you cannot apply the same thing to everybody. But inevitably, individualism, socialism. So we'll take up this whole thing now. So, in a sense, many people will say that democracy has failed. Sri Aurobindo doesn't take such a negative view. It has not succeeded as much as we would like it, but it has done a lot of good things. And then he's elaborating on that. And then the limitations and the failures and the inevitable rise of the socialistic concept.
Good. Thank you so much. Excellent.